It's bigger than biotech.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of It's Bigger Than Biotech, the podcast that helps students and early career professionals figure out what's next. Today's guest is someone who doesn't just sit at the intersection of technology, health, and wellness, he builds the roads. Dave Whelan is the Chief Business Officer at Big Four Bio, where he's shaping the life science ecosystem by driving strategy, partnerships, and regional growth. With a background that spans Stanford's Symbolic Systems program and an MBA from UCLA Anderson, Dave has worn many hats: startup founder, VC advisor, nonprofit leader, and now a fractional executive. Over the past 2 decades, he's helped turn breakthrough health ideas into real businesses, mentored founders, and built innovation communities in LA and beyond. Whether it's launching wellness ventures, scaling digital health startups, or advising global life sciences companies, Dave brings clarity, connection, and strategy to every room he's in. So, without further ado, let's dive into the mind of a true ecosystem builder. Dave, welcome to It's Bigger Than Biotech.
Awesome. Thank you. By the way, that is literally the best introduction I have ever had, and I'm going to steal that and use that in other things. So you guys are awesome. Appreciate it.
Perfect. It's great to have you on, someone who builds the roads. It's very rare to find someone like that. So, yeah, let's just get started. So, the first question I want to ask you: what did you want to be when you were 7 years old? And how did you end up in biotech instead?
Wow. That was a long time ago for me. So more recent for you. So you've got a better recollection. But I will say, I don't know if it was I don't know if it was quite when I was 7, but when I was young, I definitely thought about wanted to be an architect. I wanted to be a music producer. And then, somewhere in there, I started to think about science and really computer science. So, like this idea of being a techie, but kind of those first things were, architect and music producer. And I still like to listen to music. I wish I could create music. Interestingly, and it'll come around, like I work with a lot of architects because life sciences is such a real estate intensive business. And so architecture comes into that and kind of the built landscape. But it really comes together with, this tech side. And for me, will maybe depending on how deep you want to go right now. This idea of healthcare actually came pretty late and pretty accidentally. So I went to college to you mentioned symbolic systems. So that's what I studied at Stanford, and that's really an artificial intelligence program. And this was an artificial intelligence program in 1989 when I started. So a long time ago. AI didn't really exist as a market. There was no business for AI at the time. When I graduated from Stanford, there were no jobs in AI. I thought about it that briefly at the time. Going to at this time, the MIT Media Lab had I think was pretty new, and thought about that briefly. I was like, that could be cool. Maybe I should get a master's degree in something around this, science, technology, AI kind of thing. But instead, I, went into the work world and, interestingly, did start my healthcare journey at that time. But again, very accidentally and very temporarily. So I got a job with today we would call a venture studio. That phrase didn't even exist back then, so I thought it was kind of a venture capital firm. I don't know what it really was, what we called it at the time, but basically something called the Shaw Group, and it was an organization that had been started by a former cardiovascular surgeon from Stanford who had invented some technology, started a company. Maybe he sold the company, maybe he sued the company to get rights. I don't know. It was lots of complicated things, but anyway, he had a big pile of money and still wanted to innovate in healthcare. And so he created basically a portfolio of companies that they were either founding or investing in. And then we were basically the the operations for all these companies. So we had an office that had the finance people, had business development people, had kind of the execs for each of these companies, and then they needed an IT person, and so I was the IT person working for this company. But and that wasn't even using my degree. That was using the fact that I had worked in the computer lab at Stanford during my time there. So I was good with computers. I worked in the computer lab, got this job as an IT person, and I was just telling the stories to somebody recently. It's very funny because so working for this very small organization, they're doing a lot of deals. So we're talking to lawyers all the time. We're talking to investment bankers. We're producing deal documents. And so again, this is 1992. So there's senior people who are doing the deals, and lawyers working them, et cetera. And then we have our office. And so when you're trying to put together deal documents and even deal business models, financial models in 1992. It's really hard to do that if you don't know how to use Microsoft Word and Microsoft Excel. There was only one guy in the room who knew how to use those programs. That was me. So suddenly I became a business guy. So I'm the IT guy, but now I'm a quasi paralegal. I'm a quasi venture capitalist. I'm a quasi investment banker. And so I started to get kind of a little bit of the exposure to business, and then I did some other stuff after that. And we can I'll see where you want to take this, but so I started in healthcare, my first job out of college, but I didn't really start doing it until many years later.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you have a wealth of experience, and you've worked in so many different aspects of the field. You've worked in startups, with VCs, accelerators, nonprofits, and definitely you've had a lot of opportunities over your life, right? So, what is your filter to saying yes or no to opportunities?
It's not a good filter because I have a hard time saying no. So I say yes to a lot of things, and to some extent I do that purposefully. I think that ultimately, or let me say, I'll say yes for the moment, or maybe to a lot of things. So and I like to open myself up, and I use that in kind of projects I take on. I use that in meetings I take. So when someone wants to make an introduction to me, and this is very much an invitation to the listeners, but what I tell people is I'm happy to have one meeting with anyone. I probably won't have 2 meetings with most of those people, but I'll have 1 meeting with anyone, because you never know who you're going to meet. And look, and this goes, I'll say this probably goes for business, for school, for for dating, for anything, right? I mean, just take a chance, shoot your shot, just see who you meet. But in the world of business, I like to say that my value, really my superpower, is in people, knowing people, connecting people, assembling networks, building teams. And so, basically every person I meet or have met, is kind of that's my capital. That's my inventory. That's my asset. And so, if you come to me and say, "Hey, look, I'm about to graduate. I'm trying to start a this kind of company, and I need this sort of person and that sort of person," I probably know those people. And if I don't know them, I absolutely know the person who knows them. And so, for me, it's important to say yes, or at least say yes for the moment, because I want to meet these people. And if they can work for something now, great. If not, hopefully I'm going to remember them for the right time. And so, again, it's not a great filter, but it works. It works at least in terms of, kind of a guy I used to work with who had a consulting firm called Global Aperture. And the idea was, the aperture is kind of like in a camera, how big or, big is your opening on the lens. And the idea is you want to go into projects, go into relationships with a very open aperture, right? Kind of like like a funnel, right? It's the top of funnel. You want to have your top of funnel be as big as possible. And then you want to have a really solid process to narrow that funnel down. So, you can't do everything. And, the older I get and the more people I know and the more people who approach me about things, the more I do realize that, I can't do it all. So it's how do you get from yes, maybe to, okay, not this time, or how about you should really talk to them. Like they're perfect for you. And then they're still happy. They're getting what they needed. And I'm happy because I've got my time to do work on the next thing.
Right. A lot of valuable insight given in there. Firstly, shoot your shot. Secondly, your network is your net worth.
Yeah.
And overall, just go in with an open mind. That's very well said. So you mentioned that your purpose and your why to do this is to connect people, build networks. So what is a project you've worked on that reflects this purpose?
Wow. So hopefully every project I do, but I'll talk about something that actually was not. It ultimately was not a huge success, but it was. I think in some ways this perfect example. And so, fast forward. I mean, I talked about my time in college, and then worked for this venture studio. I did some time as an executive recruiter, building management teams. So that really started this idea of assembling teams and your network, and then came to LA to get my MBA, and the first job out of business school, which ultimately is what really took me into the world of healthcare. I was working for a subsidiary of 24 Hour Fitness, the health club chain, and at the time they'd acquired a nutritional products and programs business called Apex Fitness Group. And I was working for Apex. I was sort of the numbers guy for the marketing team, which was, again, not something I thought I'd be doing, and definitely not in that industry, but it really taught me a lot about business strategy. And then, ultimately we launched a technology product, a wearable, with a partner, and that wearable experience really pulled me into healthcare. But it also gave me a lot of experience around this whole digital health space and the nutritional supplement space and kind of like nutritional program space. And so many years after that, this is I'm trying to remember, 2018 or so, I worked on a kind of a consulting advisory project with a founder who had some capital and wanted to build a business that was using e-commerce and technology to help educate people about nutritional supplements and sell nutritional supplements. And we ended up connecting. We actually met, through like this, online kind of, connection portal. And he was looking for somebody with a very specific set of experiences. It so happened that I had them. We met, we hit it off. We started working on this project. And over a couple of years, we really dove into this. He actually moved to Los Angeles from Texas to be closer to me to build this business, and I ultimately came on board as a co-founder with him. That was great. But what really was special to me was, he had basically brought me on because he knew I knew about this area, but also he had this sense that I knew who we should bring in. And over these couple of years, I was able to assemble this incredible team. In some ways, it was like my dream team. Like I would get this group back together again for something else. And they were people that I had worked with when I worked for 24 Hour Fitness. They were people that, in one case, it was a guy that I knew from my undergrad program. He was like part of my study group in undergrad. And it was all these people in between. And so I remember, when things were really humming along, and eventually they weren't, we couldn't quite raise the capital we needed, but we had this incredible team. And I remember sort of looking around the room, like either the physical room or the virtual room, and being like, wow, this is like, basically this is my network. Like this, we've created a company here, an incredible team. And it's because of the people that I've met over the years, people that I've worked with, worked for, collaborated with. Probably most importantly, these are people that I respected and they respected me. I liked them, they liked me. So all of those things come into play where, that's hard to do because, first of all, in business, sometimes it's hard to, sometimes it's hard to separate the business and personal. Sometimes it's easy to separate it in that, there can be plenty of people who you're like, that's a star performer, but I really don't like them. Like, I don't want to work with them. And, the bigger the company you're working with, the more of those people there might be, right? Where you're like, and, you see this famously with, some of the, at least the most famous or infamous CEOs who built incredible businesses, Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, Travis Kalanick from Uber, like, they're all kind of jerks. And a lot of people don't like to work with them. And so, if you can build an awesome business, or even just try to build an awesome business and still have people that like you and you like them, and there's that mutual respect and kind of it's a business, you're trying to work hard, you're trying to put things into it, but also, you're also in it to have fun. And so there's another lesson here about do what makes you happy and work with people that make you happy.
Yeah, definitely. And you've been part of so many teams, and you've had to work on so many projects. I know for a lot of students, team building and working in teams starts from early on within school. And you already slightly touched upon this a little bit, but what are some red or green flags you can see in potential teammates that you say are prevalent and would be a good factor to see whether you should work with someone in a team or whether you shouldn't?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And first of all, I'm glad that so much of this happens in it happens in college. It happens in college. Happens way earlier. Like I feel like to some extent, with the exception of a couple of those classes I took at Stanford with the guy I ultimately ended up working with, most of my classes weren't team based in college. They were in business school, but college not so much, and very much not earlier in high school and things. I think today that's very much a different situation. And we have kids, 14-year-old son and a 10-year-old daughter, and they've been doing. I mean, my daughter does team PowerPoints, and PowerPoint didn't even exist when I was in that grade and things like that. But that being said, we all naturally do create teams and groups, and I think that really it's as simple as what you learn on the playground, or the people you hang out with at lunch, and playing kickball or foursquare or whatever in kindergarten. Same rules apply, and it's as simple as you want to find people that that give as much to the team as they take from the team. People who listen as much as they talk. People who can take charge, but also are not bullies. So really, I think we learned all of this in kindergarten. It's just some of us forget it, right? Or some of us decide we want to go a different path, and it does get harder because when the stakes get bigger, sometimes different factors come to play. But I think it's it really is easy to it's really easy to size people up pretty quickly based on a first meeting, based on a first lunch. I remember I mentioned I was an executive recruiter, and my boss, who had founded this recruiting firm, incredible mentor, Conrad Prusak, and one of the things he gave me many little words of wisdom along the way. But we were recruiting CEOs, leaders of companies, and we would bring them into our offices sometimes. Eventually, then we would send this candidate to meet with the client, this company they would ultimately be working for. And of course, they're going to have the usual interview, but you're probably going to take them to lunch somewhere along the way. They're going to show up in your office, or they're going to show up in the client's office, and they're going to check in at the front desk, things like that. And watch for what they do. It's one thing, how does a CEO talk to another CEO, but take a look and see, how does that CEO talk to the waiter or waitress in that restaurant at lunch? When they check in at the front desk, the person who's sitting there at the desk, how do they treat them? How do they talk to them? Do they ask them questions? Are they nice, or are they looking at them as somebody who's not them? And you can really learn a lot about how somebody would be on a team, how somebody would be a leader, and ultimately, is this someone that you want to be representing your idea, your company, your presence in the industry?
Definitely. Wow, very, very powerful method. Definitely take someone out to lunch or a meal and see how they interact with the wait staff.
Yeah.
And that's definitely very powerful. But one thing I was meaning to ask you, and it's a question that a lot of students before they come to university have, is that, like, does a university's name matter? Like, you went to Stanford and you also went to UCLA, but let's just say you didn't go to either of these schools. Like, would you think your career path would be different, or do you think the name really boosted your career in certain way?
Yeah, I mean, I do think it did, and I say did because I feel like that's less important today than it was 25 years ago when I went to business school, or 35 years ago when I went to college. I think it can certainly help, but I've kind of watched, and especially as a recruiter once upon a time, and now just as a hiring person and as a collaborator, I'm constantly looking at what are people's paths. And yes, there are plenty of, statistically, there are plenty of Fortune 500 CEOs who, worked at McKinsey and went to Harvard. That's absolutely true. But then you look at other CEOs, and there are CEOs who, went to a school you've never heard of, or didn't even go to school or finish the school. And so I think ultimately, the quality of a program can help. The network certainly helps. And so, Harvard has a great network. USC has a great network. UCLA Business School is a great network. And, all of these things, those things count for a lot. But I also think that there's a lot that someone can get from being at the school that's right for them, and then doing the right things. And I think we talked a little bit about this, and I was just meeting with this graduate program seminar elsewhere at USC, and one of the things I mentioned is, like, when you are a student, you can contact anyone. I mean, you can email anyone, and you're building a podcast based on being able to reach out to people. And I know another guy actually who has a podcast, and he's not a student, so I guess I'm already breaking my rule. But, like, when you're a student, you can literally email anyone, and 9 times out of 10, or probably 99 times out of 100, you will get an email response back. And this is up to, like, the senior most people, and you lose that special, secret path to make that happen once you're out of school. And so I think, where I was going with that is, like, yes, if you can go to a great school with a great network, that's perfect. But if you don't, then make the great network, and leverage that while you can. And what you start to realize is that you meet a well networked person, and then they're going to help you get even better networked. And so yeah, I mean, I think and again, my kids, at this point, I'm thinking, our 14-year-old, he wants to be an Imagineer, like design things for Disney. And so he has his path, and he'll want to go. Our daughter, who's 10, I don't even know if, like, college will exist in the same form when, in 8 years, when she would go to college. So maybe she's not even going to college. I don't know.
Yeah, possibly. Like, I mean, AI is changing everything
Yeah.
about the world. But, like, it's definitely very important to network no matter where you are and build that connection and network. Again, network is your net worth. But another big part of students going into a space is like, what do you do within that space? Like, how do you approach a certain field? So I wanted to ask you, how did you approach the uncertainties that came with choosing a career path back when you were an undergrad and you didn't know where you would be in the next 10 years?
Yeah. Um, well, I definitely tried a lot, first of all. So, and I think first of all, every student will say that or every person will say that whenever they graduated, it was a tough times. It was a bad economy. But I graduated both times. I graduated, it was a tough time. It was a bad economy. And so when I was graduating from, and by the way, when I was in college and undergrad, uh, the one thing that I didn't do was I didn't really focus on kind of the summer internship type thing. I worked with a professor my summer between junior and senior year, so that was it was kind of related to the whole artificial intelligence space to some extent, or really, the software space. But that was the only thing I had done kind of relevant to the industry. So I didn't focus on that, which, I wish I had done that. But then when I was graduating, I honestly wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And I can tell you that, first of all, this was, again, this was before the internet. It was before emailing a lot of stuff. And so this was, basically, you would go to the career center in the school, and there would be like brochures there about companies and things like that, and like paper applications for companies, and you would fill these things out. I mean, I can't even imagine. I can barely like remember what that was like. Very different from today. But there was on-campus recruiting, and I think I had not just one, but like multiple letters and applications for, I'm going to say, management consulting, investment banking, management development programs in everything from retail to, restaurants to consumer packaged goods. So I was looking at, first of all, and I think, on the one hand, I think, I think about this as, well, did I know what I was doing? And then I could look at it another way and say, I was already looking at it through this lens of, I want to be involved in business from multiple perspectives, and I would love to learn about this. So, I mean, if I actually could have had a year working in a retail leadership development program, and a year working for a management consulting firm, and a year working for a CPG company, that would have been awesome, actually, because I really would have this very well-rounded thing. But so I was, putting myself out there in a lot of different ways. And what's really interesting is, I mean, if one of those had come through, we might not be having this conversation today, right? I mean, I could be like the CEO of Taco Bell, and then, I mean, maybe you'd want to have me on a different podcast, but because Taco Bell was one of the companies that I think I talked to. So, but part of that was just sort of experimenting, and even in business school. So when I went to business school, again, I had been this executive recruiter building management teams. A lot of our clients were tech companies, and especially telecom companies. And this was in the mid to late 90s. So like wireless telephone, the whole mobile space was really coming together in a big way. So we worked with a lot of these companies in the wireless space, and broadband was starting to become a thing. So my vision going to business school was to become a telecom venture capitalist. That was kind of my, like, why what I thought I wanted to do with business school. But I knew that there were not going to be a lot of opportunities with that. It turns out there really were not a lot of opportunities, because this was after the dot-com crash. So there weren't a lot of venture capital jobs. There weren't a lot of telecom jobs. And so I did, while at business school, did look again a little bit at um, investment banking and strategy consulting and some things like that. And in some cases, firms wanted to talk to me. In other cases, I talked to them. Again, it was just, opening up my eyes to different sorts of things. My summer internship during business school was with a venture capital firm. So I got the venture capital piece. It was a firm that was working on a fintech product. So not an industry I wanted to be involved in. But, so I was narrowing down at least a piece of where I wanted to focus, but I was still, opening up my aperture to different sorts of things.
Definitely. It's more so about having an open mind with these things.
Yeah.
But specifically, one thing that came up in my mind while you were answering this was that, there's two types of philosophies when you're having a vision for yourself in the future. One's like, I have a vision and I want to do this one thing, and you go full fledged towards it. And the second one is being a bit more open minded and just going with the flow and having constant change in vision. What would you say is better? Like, being in a constant flow and a constant end goal you want, what would you say is a better way of imagining the future for yourself? One that is constantly shifting, or one that is straight and you have to do everything to get there?
Yeah, I mean, this might be the easy answer, but I think it is kind of a mix of both of those, and I think it's great to have. Well, it's great to have dreams, and it's also great to have a vision. And if those things are the same, that's really awesome. But a dream might be to be a rock star. Having a vision to be a rock star, for most people, that still doesn't help, right? But you could be talking to. I mean, you could talk to Taylor Swift, and she could say, my dream was to be a rock star, and my vision is to be a rock star. And hey, look, I'm a rock star. So, but most people don't get to do that. But having a dream is great, or multiple, right? And so, I could say my dream is still to be a music producer, to be an architect, right? But I've never really made a vision around that. You have a vision, but you also, you want to have flexibility because different things come up, and to some extent, that's why I went to business school, was to I was doing things. I was a recruiter. I could have kept on being a recruiter. I could have shifted a little bit from that. Instead, I said, let me go to business school to kind of, really open up the aperture, give myself a clean slate to play around with some things. And so I think having both of those, and it kind of, if you think about, put it in a business context or a, strategic planning context, I'm going to butcher the quote, but I think it was, it's like a Winston Churchill kind of thing, right? So it's, this idea that, your plans are always wrong, right? But, planning is always the right thing to do, right? So, you're never going to do exactly what the plan was, but the planning process, helps get you there part of the way. And it also gives you some potential tools or side things to take. But if you have this plan and you follow it to the letter without adjusting based on new data, I mean, you're probably going to fail because ultimately you couldn't have thought of all of the things. And so again, and this is where I'll take it back to entrepreneurship for a second though, because I think to some extent entrepreneurs are maybe they're the counterexample to that, and I'll put entrepreneurs and professional athletes and rock stars all in the same category because there aren't a lot of successful ones in any of those, and the way to be successful is to keep on doing it and keep on doing it against all odds. So in that case, you're maybe, the successful entrepreneur is the person who, all things being equal, they're the one who, stayed with it when things got really bad, and then, they made it happen. And I think the same thing could be said for, the athlete or the rock star, right? It's like they just stuck with it, but they did also have they had a vision and they had the skills to do it, and they probably had some luck as well. And I think all of those things come into play. So I don't know where I was going with the whole story here, except for the fact that I think it's important to have a mix of both, and that goes whether it's for your company, for your career, for your your personal life, everything. It's you want to have dreams, have visions, have a plan, and then prepare to do something that maybe looks like some version of that, but maybe doesn't. And what I love is I've got a few more years on you here, but I still I couldn't tell you what I'm going to be doing in in 5 years or 10 years, and like I have an idea of some of the things I'll be doing, but I'm almost certain that there is like something I'm going to be working on in 5 years or 10 years that I have no clue of right now, and it's going to show up, and I'll say, "This is interesting. I want to try this." And so, you got to keep yourself open to that, regardless of where you are in your career or your life.
Definitely. Even with your career specifically, you mentioned you wanted to go into VC specifically from a young age, and you did end up there to some extent, maybe not telecom, but still within another
Right.
industry. So I guess it goes to show that with your career specifically, even though there's a straight general direction, like where you ended up is in that direction, but not exactly where you wanted to be, which
Right.
is great.
Yeah,
honestly.
exactly. And by the way, I mean, at this point now in my life, I mean, I'm doing so much in healthcare, and I'm doing work with a venture capital firm, and ultimately, I think at some point I'll say, hey, look, I am a VC, and I'm a VC in healthcare, which is an area that I have far more interest in and passion for healthcare today than I did for telecom in 2000. So it's probably the right place, right time, and it all comes together in the right way.
Definitely. So if you could go back to your 21-year-old self and give him one piece of advice, what would it be?
One piece of advice for my 21-year-old self. Well, I was living in San Francisco, so it was easy. I should have just invested in real estate. That's an easy one. But if I think more, I guess open it up a bit. I do think. I do think the idea would be to even then start to take some more risks and think a bit more outside the box. And I think earlier in my career I was focused on sort of I have to get I had this first job, I have to get a promotion there, and now I'm tired of this, and you have to get a new job. And it was very, it was very regimented. And by the way, I still, I worked for relatively small, flexible organizations. I mean, my life is very unregimented compared to, somebody who went to work for IBM or Price Waterhouse or something like that out of college. I mean, that would be very regimented. But even so, I look at myself and say, I still was looking at this, maybe a bit too regimented. And, I was kind of, in the early work world when the .com, stuff started to happen. And I think I kind of looked at, I had some friends from college who were, starting some companies or working in these startups. And, and I was like, well, they're doing that. I'm like, I've got this job. I need this job. I can't do that. And, maybe I should have done that. Maybe I should have tried a little bit harder, or not harder, just, gotten a bit more creative and, opened up the possibilities a bit. And so I think that's why I now have that, say yes or say, yes now, maybe, as opposed to, saying no too early.
Definitely. So take risks earlier in your life.
Right.
Definitely. And so talking about taking risks earlier in your life and recruitment specifically, like you've been in several positions where you've had to recruit people. What is one thing that you recommend potential people looking to recruit should do in order to stand out?
In order to stand out, which is really important, because it's even in a competitive job market, it's always competitive both directions. And so, I think it's, to stand out, it's really important to be able to present your company, your team, and yourself as a, whether it's as a manager or as a, colleague, present all these things in a way where, you're really demonstrating not just why they would want to be part of that, but why you do want to be part of that, right? So make sure it's very clear that, again, like the passion comes through. And I think, if you're passionate about what you're doing and you tell people why you're passionate about it, you will attract other people who are passionate about it, and the rest will work itself out.
Definitely. So, would you say in some way it's manifesting?
There's, a bit. I think it is a bit of, a bit of manifesting,
Okay.
or you put it a different way. It's more of the, lead by example, or really set a standard. And so, but I think that is, that is a bit of manifesting. And and by the way, the other piece that goes along with that sort of standard team building thing is, there's two aspects. So one is the idea of you really want to hire A players, because A players will help the company be an A company, and if you hire B players, then they're going to hire C players, and then nothing happens. That's one angle, but the one that I've always taken to heart is you want to hire people who are better at their job than you are. Maybe you even want to hire people who are better at your job than you are, because ultimately you want these people to succeed. You want them to be doing great things, and ultimately you want to be able to free yourself up to do something else. So if you're a scientist starting a company, and and now you're going out and you're raising funding and things like that, then you either need to hire an awesome fundraising executive who's going to do that so you can focus on the science, or you're going to decide, okay, now I've done that, I'm going to get an even better scientist to build the technology so I can get out there in front of investors and tell the story. And so in that case, you're either you're replacing yourself, you're hiring yourself out of a job so you can do the next job.
Definitely. And so, how this piece of advice translate for students specifically? Do they need to focus on being more technical, or just go down that one route, or be a jack of all trades and be good at several things?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough conundrum, because I think that there is more and more specialization in the world, and I think being an expert at something is incredibly valuable. That said, it's really hard to be an expert at something when you're 21 years old, right? Even when you're 30 years old, it's hard to be an expert at something. And so, I would say, more often than not, I like the idea of developing a well-rounded set of skills. And along the way, you are going to find some things where you want to focus on. But I think you can continue to develop those over time, or you can position yourself a certain way, for a certain opportunity, but you still need to be broad enough, be that jack of all trades, to be able to, especially in a startup environment, right? And maybe in a bigger company, you want to be a bit more focused, but ultimately, a good company and a good hiring manager is not going to hire somebody right out of college because of their experience, because in most cases they don't have it, right? They're going to hire someone because of their curiosity, because of the set of experiences they've done, but it might be something completely different than what you think it is. And again, it's easy to teach someone how to be a better programmer or a better marketer, or to close the books or whatever. But it's hard to teach someone how to be a curious learner, how to be a flexible leader, things like that. And so, again, I think, build some skills, but really focus on just being an awesome, team member.
Definitely. So it's more about the curiosity to learn and the drive you have for yourself to do something.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, again, earlier in your career, you've got the opportunity to try different things, and you've got hopefully the opportunity to go to your boss and say, like, I want to do something different. Or, in some cases, the boss will, guide you. And, I've had some great, when I was working for 24 Hour Fitness, I was working for the subsidiary. My boss was actually worked for 24 Hour Fitness and was kind of on loan as a fractional head of marketing for the organization I was part of. And, I remember I was learning what this role was, and the idea of being kind of this numbers guy for the marketing team, which ultimately became more of like a product strategy and a business strategy role. I credit him for helping to guide me. And I remember, one day he called me up and he was like, you should, start to understand the business more effectively, build your analysis, and, keep on refining this analysis and get the analysis in front of the CEO, every month. And, do that. And, eventually he's going to love this and want more. And that's how you create this role. And I fought him probably for 2 or 3 months. I probably didn't do anything. I said, okay, we'll talk about it. And then, eventually he's like, you should really do that. I think actually by the time I was doing that, he had already kind of shifted away and, wasn't even working on our business anymore. We would still talk every so often. And I still remember probably 6 months later, we were having a catch-up call, and I was like, that was really good advice. I'm doing that now. The CEO loves me, and he's pulling me into these important things. And so, in that case, it's stepping outside of my boundaries, following the guidance from somebody who was a trusted advisor, and reshaping my role.
Definitely. So go the extra mile wherever you are. Definitely. That's great. And so, a more complicated question most of our listeners in the technical fields might be wondering, who are probably interested in going into the business aspect. If I'm a pre-med student who just dropped their degree and is going to more of a business field and maybe strategy or operations, and I'm not technical, so to say,
Mm-hmm.
like how would you approach that situation and enter the strategy and operations side of the industry?
Yeah. So, first of all, a lot of the consulting firms, at least, they're looking for those kinds of backgrounds. So that's actually an easy one. No one is naturally a strategy consultant. I can even remember when I was interviewing for some of those strategy firms in college. I remember telling my father that I was, I was like, oh, I could be a strategy consultant. And his question to me was, because how could you be a strategy consultant? You've never done anything. It's like, how can you advise people on their business when you haven't done it? But because he had not worked with good strategy consultants and didn't understand that. But the fact is, typically these strategy firms it's like a mini MBA in a company, and they actually look for people who have built some expertise or interest in something. And it could be, okay, they're an engineer, we want to bring an engineer into this, or they've got this, that pre-med background, so they have enough of an understanding. There's certain strategy consulting firms, and they're like, we always bring on ex history majors, right? Because history majors are incredibly analytical, research oriented, have a point of view and like a critical eye, right? So all of those things together, that could be a great strategy consultant. An engineer, problem solving, process oriented, that could be a great strategy consultant. So I think, from a standpoint of, coming out of school, you can apply to those things. It gets a little bit tougher, a bit after that. But again, I think it's finding opportunities where, again, you might know a little bit more than your boss, and so maybe there's an organization that they've got this business going, and they're looking for someone who has a bit more of a medical background. Then it's a great place to get in. You're bringing your medical acumen, and you're learning that business from them. And so, especially early in your career, I think that's easy to do. And again, it gets harder over time, and that's why you go to business school, because it gives you a chance to go through that process again and try something new. It gets harder to just completely switch or use a small amount of experience to go into something with a big amount of experience.
Definitely. That's very useful advice for a lot of the students who are pre-meds,
Yeah.
because it shows that you're not stuck in a certain field. You could definitely branch out if you wish to do it.
Right.
And so, looking at more of the industry in a broad way, what trends do you see within biotech or health every student should be paying attention to right now?
Yeah, there's there's always a lot, and I know you've talked about some of these with with some of the people I know and some of the people I didn't know before, but I won't spend a lot of time talking about AI, but AI is absolutely a trend, and I think it's a great time. It's really a great time to be looking at innovation, because I feel like AI as an enabler is going to allow so many of us to do things that we couldn't do otherwise, and so I think that's great. And so everyone should be learning enough how to use these tools to be able to approach the world. And actually, that's the example I gave earlier. It's like what put me on this path. At least one of the pieces was hey, I evolved from an IT role to this like chief of staff role in a healthcare venture studio, because I was the guy who could use Microsoft Word and Microsoft Excel. So everyone can use that today. Not everyone can use ChatGPT. So I was the guy who could do that. Be the guy who can do that today. So that's a trend. But I think in healthcare broadly, we're seeing finally seeing a lot more focus on leveraging technology around, remote patient monitoring, telehealth, point of care diagnostics, at home testing. All of those are much more prevalent today than they were 5 years ago, 10 years ago. A lot of that came about because of COVID. COVID forced consumers, patients, physicians, payers all to open up their eyes to this technology, and so now there's more opportunities there. In the biotech space, we're continuing to see growth around cell and gene therapies, and I know you've talked about some of those as well. That's a big growth area. It's a slow, tough area right now, and we're kind of in we're kind of in this, not so much the valley of death, but it's, what do they call, it's like the trough of disillusionment or something like that, right? So there was some early successes. Now there have not been enough follow-on successes, which makes everyone get disgruntled, get unhappy. Thankfully, there's AI, so people can focus on AI right now, and then we'll come back to AI-driven cell therapy at some point. AI for drug discovery as a specific, AI for diagnoses, helping to support triage, things like that. And then, we were talking a little bit earlier, one of the big trends that we will continue to see more regardless of who is in who is in office in Washington, is this idea of value-based healthcare. And what that is once upon a time, and we all used to, whether you're paying to go to the doctor, you're paying your insurance company, basically we looked at doctors in the healthcare industry as helping to fix sick people, and if they're sick again, they go back again and they get fixed, and we sort of like keep on doing the same thing over and over, with no regard for, is this working? Is this providing value? And so, it's been more prevalent in Europe, or at least more obvious in Europe, but continuing to grow in the U.S. This idea of let's actually measure healthcare based on value, based on, is it high quality healthcare? Are we increasing the quality? And is it low cost healthcare? Are we decreasing costs? And if you can do one of those or both of those, you're increasing the value. And this is something that healthcare entrepreneurs really should be thinking about, because those are ultimately the levers that will help their business succeed. You need to be thinking about that, because every person you're talking to, whether it's a consumer or a patient, whether it's a physician, whether it's the insurance company that's ultimately paying for it, whether it's the CFO of a hospital or the IT person of the hospital, and ultimately you might be talking to all of those people to sell your product, and they're going to be looking at, hey, is this going to help us, make more money? Is it going to help us save money? Is it going to help improve patient outcomes, which, by the way, then improve patient satisfaction scores, which show up in magazines and make people want to go there. And so it's an important area, and we can come back to it. But I've been doing a little bit of work in value-based healthcare, and would love to share that with the podcast community as well.
Definitely. That's a lot of different trends you talked about in a lot of different fields. But specifically on the opposite side of that question, what are some trends you feel like will fizzle out and lose value over the next 5 years?
AI.
Okay.
It's again, what and I actually do. I do mean that, but I mean it in a way that we've seen this happen before. So and the internet was the last, I think the last one where it saw the same thing. So when I was a recruiter, when I was kind of early in my career in the 90s, suddenly the internet was everywhere, and and people were sort of figuring out their internet strategy, and they were launching their internet business, right? But it wasn't just it wasn't an internet business. It was like an internet business to sell pet products, right? And there were 3 of those, and and then they're all gone, right? But ultimately, what we realized is we don't need an internet business to sell pet products. We need the good pet products businesses to know how to use the internet more effectively. And the analogy I made back then was, which was a much I think more straightforward analogy. I said, okay, you've got your business, and now you're talking about how you're an internet business. But I said, talk to your peers, think about other industries. Like, do you know companies that talk about like being really good at using the telephone? Like, are there telephone businesses? Yes, there's call centers, but once upon a time, no business used the telephone, right? And then the general store got a telephone, and then the business down the street got a telephone. Now everyone has a telephone, and nobody talks about it. I said, someday everyone will have the internet, and nobody will talk about it. And to some extent, that's the case, right? We use the internet. It's like we do talk about it, but we don't talk about like, is your business using the internet? So we'll get there with AI as well. So AI will become table stakes in a sense, but it just become we don't need to dwell on it. It just becomes something that we use, and so that will evolve. But I think more more specifically, it's hard to say, because I think what you could argue, like blockchain perhaps was something that, I mean, that truly is something that, in some ways it was the thing, and now it's kind of gone in a lot of ways. And in fact, you can ask any venture capitalist in healthcare or other industries, and they will say that they've gotten at least one business plan that they've received it twice. They got it last year, and it said blockchain this, blockchain this, blockchain this, and then they're getting the business plan now, and it says AI, same thing, AI, basically they did a find and replace, and they changed blockchain in their business plan to AI, and that's their business. Those businesses will not last.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we've had a lot of those, especially with trends that come up. There's always a few trends that have downside projects, such as like with AI, like a lot of AI companies, few boom, like the rest, like you never know what the value proposition is. It's
right.
just a buzzword to everyone. But you're completely right. Like maybe later, like AI will just become a normal day thing for all businesses. It's just like having a website now.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I mean, when you have kids, it's even easier to think about these things, because I kind of, I look at what they take for granted and how they interact with things. And, when you look at things through their eyes and how quickly they adapt to something, you start to realize, like, the things that they're going to use are things that everyone's going to use. And like, that's how things get to be successful.
Right.
And so, although interesting, I think I probably use AI more than my kids do, but I know they use it, which is, they have less reason to use it. Plus the schools are still trying to, discourage them from using it and to cheat. And so, but yeah, I think, you kind of look at how they adapt to these things or adopt these things. That's how society will adopt things.
Definitely. And my last question to you is, if a student wants to shape biotech, not just work in it, what are the top 3 things you tell them?
They want to shape the industry, not just work in it. So, I'm going to probably repeat myself with a couple of things. I'm going to say, first, pick something that you can get really excited about, really passionate about, because, ultimately that's going to be, more successful. Ideally, pick something that you can have a personal connection to, and it does not need to be so personal. There are a lot of people who go into healthcare because they had a disease, they lost a loved one to something, and they say, I don't want that to happen to somebody else. I mean, there are plenty of those people. I mean, if you happen to have those situations and you're building a company around that, then that's a wonderful thing to do. But even if it's not that, it's something where you can relate to it. You really you have some connections, because you want to be able to talk about this authentically. You can make a lot of money in healthcare, but you really want to make a lot of impact, and you want to know why you're making the impact. So I think that's the second one. And then the third one I would say is, pick something that is, that seems too hard, that seems, pick the impossible goals. I mean, there are a lot of people tackling the incremental things, and there's room to make businesses there. But I think that if you're really going to make it, pick a North Star that is maybe you believe nobody can accomplish, and then keep going after that. And what will happen is you'll make a lot of great things happen along the way.
And that's a wrap on today's episode with Dave Whelan, a true strategist and connector at the heart of health innovation. From Big for Bio to the boardroom to the back of the napkin ideas, Dave reminded us that it's not just about having a great vision, it's about building the ecosystem that makes that vision real. If today's conversation sparks something in you, an idea, a question, a next step, don't let it fade. Share it, act on it, And if you're someone trying to find your fit in biotech, wellness, or digital health, remember what Dave said. Follow the thread of curiosity and build something that matters. If you enjoyed the episode, please rate us, follow, and share. It helps bring on more amazing guests like Dave. You can also find clips, resources, and more insights on our LinkedIn and Instagram at It's Bigger Than Biotech. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time on It's Bigger Than Biotech.
As he shared at the end of the podcast, Dave welcomes members of the It's Bigger Than Biotech community to learn more about value-based healthcare. Use these promo codes by May 29th to get free lifetime access to these courses. All we ask is that you give us 5 stars to encourage others on Udemy to try these courses too.